Alright, welcome back, and we're going to continue with our lectures over HTML. So we're going to move into a discussion about elements, attributions, as well as it means when we talk about parent and child elements. So we're going to be talking about some new terms that you might not have heard before. I would encourage you to take notes. It's really going to help if you understand the terminology and later discussions that we will have when it comes to needing help on your website, help coding, problem solving. So understanding this terminology is going to be important. So I'd encourage you to take some notes. All right, so let's dive back into the basics, and we're going to start with elements. So an element. We've seen some of this HTML markup language before. We've seen what it looks like. So what is an element? An element, if you can think of it as just a label that helps describe different parts of your website or your web page. For example, it's saying this is a heading, this is a paragraph. Those are just those elements let the web browser know what we're looking at. So this top example in the gray square, that's considered an element. We have two paragraph tags and we have some content in between. It's telling the web browser, hey, here's some paragraph context, and it says here is some text. So in the second example, we get pretty specific. We have on describing what an element looks like. We have the start tag, the ending tag. We have the tag which constitutes of the angle brackets for the starting, and then the ending tag has the inclusion of that / to end out the tag. And then in the middle we have the content. So that is an example of an element. We move it down to this third example. That's an element as well. We have the paragraph element, and then we have this emphasis tag around childs that it constitutes another element. So that last box down there just shows you what that will look like. Having the emphasis tags around childs will result in childs having an italicized style to it. So most elements can contain both text and other elements. It just depends on what tag you're working with. But remember, we have a start tag with the element's name and attributions. And then we have the closing tag with the / letting the web browser know we're closing that tag out. I do want to bring up one point. There are a handful of empty elements. These are also called void elements. And they can contain text or other elements, but they look like a combination of a start and an end tag with an initial less than sign and the element's name followed by any attributes that it may have. So here's an example of what that will look like. We have this image source. So in our previous lectures, we know that this is going to pull up an image. But notice how we don't have an opening image and a closing image tag. All we have at the end is that / in the closing bracket. But within that, we do have quite a number of attributions that will help better define what that image is going to look like. Where is it coming from? What the width is, the height is, what the alternative alt text is going to be. Do want to point out that space and closing / is optional. In previous HTML, for HTML(X), which was what we had before HTML5, that was required. Things change, so some things you will read might have that in there, some may not. Also, it doesn't matter if you code in uppercase or lowercase, the website will act the same regardless, but I will caution you and kind of point out that if you want to look like a professional, don't use all capital letters. Just stick with lowercase. Alright, so now that we know what an element is, as a reminder, this first example on the top in the gray square, that is an element. So attributions contain additional information about an element. So in HTML5, an attribute's value may optionally be enclosed in quotation marks. It says optionally, but I would make it a point to always put your attribution, your values for an attribution in quotation marks. Sometimes you get into instances where it's required. Um, just make it a habit. Just do it. When you're working in Dreamweaver, it's going to automatically do it for you. So just make that a habit. So let's take a look at this first example. So this additional information about the element. So for label, uh, we have 4, and 4 is an attribution of label. And then the value, which is in the quotation marks, is email, and that's the value for the attribute. So in that second example, that second box, this would be if you had a website and you had fields of information that people could enter in. So one of them was you wanted them to insert or type in their email address. You're just labeling that empty space for them to type in their email address. Let's take a look at the third example. So we have a paragraph, and the paragraph content says I am a paragraph. But we're providing an attribution of style. So style is the attribution of the paragraph, and the value of that style attribution is the color red, denoted by, in quotation marks, color colon red. So let's get a little bit more specific about what an attribution can and cannot do, and what those look like a little bit more specifically. Some attributions have, or I'm sorry, some elements have more than one attributions or attributes. So in this example, we have a link. So we have the anchor tag, the A, that is our element, or the part of the element, the opening element. And then we have href, which is an attribute of A. And then we have our equal sign, and then in quotation marks, the value, which is the website that we want this link to go to. We have a second one. We have a second attribute. Rel is also an attribute for A. And then the value for rel is external. Same thing for title. Title is the attribution of A, and the value for title is learn more about WTAMU agriculture. Now let's get into that, what it can and cannot accept. So some attributes can accept any value, but there are some that kind of have a list of predetermined values. So enumerated attributes only choose from this predefined list of values. So for example, this link is not talking about a hyperlink, so it's different from the previous one. We're linking to a style sheet, to another file. So when we get into media, we have this predefined value, and screen is one of those predefined values. Print is another predefined value for media. We can't just put in whatever we want there, unlike the previous example where we could put whatever website we wanted. And then if we go back to the previous slide and we were talking about the color, we could put whatever predefined color we wanted. This is a little bit more restrictive. And then we have href, which is linking, like a hyperlink, to a certain file. And in this instance, that file could be named whatever we wanted it to be. So that is not a predefined value. We get to decide what that's called. All right, so we're getting to the end of the slides for this lecture. I do want to talk about parents and children. It's extremely important that we understand how we stack things, and how we code things, because we want to be sure that things are going to be ready to go when we start creating this CSS code for our HTML. So if one element contains another, it is considered to be the parent of the enclosed or child element. So for this example, we have article, which opens up 3 more elements within the article element. So article is the parent for H1, for image source, and for the paragraph. and for the emphasis tags. So when we get down into it, we have article is the parent for paragraph, and then the paragraph is the parent for the emphasis, right here where it says strongly. So this article has 2 children in this instance right here for a paragraph, and then we get into the emphasis. So it's important that you realize how these things are encased or enclosed in each other. It's also important that we don't overlap lines. Okay, so this first line is correct. So the paragraph I, and then we want to emphasize the word strongly, believe that WT is the best place to be. This is correct, no overlapping lines. This second line right here is incorrect. I, and then we open up our emphasis, strongly believe that WT is one of the best places to be. We close out our paragraph before we close out our emphasis. This needs to be back here so that it encloses or encases the one word that we want to provide italicized style to. So be sure that you keep an eye on and be cognizant of how these elements are stacking within each other, and then how we create those tags. We want to be sure that there are no overlapping lines, and then we don't want these sets of tags to cross over each other. All right, so that is it for this brief lecture. Hopefully everything was understandable. I would encourage you to go to your book first and read through this section, Markup, Elements, Attributes, Values, and More in Chapter 1. Look at those examples, and if you have questions, you can always reach out to me and I'll be able to provide some assistance.